particularly care to go. The fact that Nightfong made these statements was, I think, a resulting part of the pressure that was caused by Duke students and their willingness to participate in the process. And also, I think it sent an important message to the media and to the community at large, which was that Duke students were willing to stand up for their colleagues who had been falsely accused. And again, this helped reverse the caricature of lacrosse players as these horrible people who no one should stand up for. I think it was actually long-term very important. So to sum up, hopefully, made three general points. The first is that this case, I think, created a really frightening glimpse inside the criminal justice system of Durham. I certainly hope that the criminal justice systems of most cities are not like this. I suspect that really they aren't. If there is any criminal justice system that really needs to reform, it is this one. And we haven't seen a whole lot of impetus for genuine reform from the powers that be within Durham. I think Mayor Bell and Councilman Brown have really stood out in this regard. We haven't seen a lot of effort from other city leaders in Durham, and hopefully we will. And while Nightfong has been discredited, most of his allies within the criminal justice system remain, and that should concern any resident of Durham, because any of you, not me fortunately, could run up against these people in the future, and that should cause concern. The second, I think, is that generalized analyses of this case are really misleading. The media didn't rush to judgment. Elements of the media rushed to judgment. The faculty didn't rush to judgment. Elements of the faculty rushed to judgment. And the civil rights community didn't rush to judgment. Elements of the civil rights community rushed to judgment. And what we saw from people like Jim Coleman, or Steve Baldwin, or the economics professors, or the Duke student government, the Chronicle, Duke Students for an Ethical Durham, was exactly what we would hope to see in the most idealized form from people in an academic setting. And so for all of the bad that we saw on the academic side, and there was a lot of bad in this case, we also saw an awful lot of good. And I think you could argue that in the sum of things, the performance was really a positive one from at least critical aspects of the Duke community. And then finally, this episode cast a really troubling light, I think, on some quarters of the Duke faculty, in particular some departments in which the Group of 88 predominate or exercise considerable influence. A groupthink atmosphere, an unwillingness to consider any facts that contradicted preconceived notions oriented around this theory of race, class, and gender. And I wanted to end the talk with two vignettes from really what I think are the opposite ideological extremes of the Group of 88. The first was the author of the statement, Juanita Lubiano. And in February of 2007, she gives an interview to the Chronicle of Higher Education, leading magazine that deals with higher ed issues, in which she says, and I'm quoting here, "In the moment when the ad came out, I did not hear from one colleague that there was something wrong with the ad." Let's leave aside this question of whether the ad was correct or not. How is it possible that, if we accept Lubiano's testimony, that 87 highly intelligent people could not have had any problems with an ad that was this inflammatory, that an ad that defense attorneys immediately recognized as problematic, that an ad that Chronicle, both the editorial page and op-ed writers recognized was immediately problematic. It was an unintentional admission of this remarkable groupthink mentality that seems to exist among some elements within the group. The second vignette comes again from the opposite extreme, someone who, unlike a history professor, a tenured history professor, who, unlike Lubiano, had taught many lacrosse players, had treated them fairly in class. Several of them had viewed her as a mentor. She had frequently gone to lacrosse games. A couple had become very close to her during their Duke experience. When they saw her name on the Group of 88's statement, they were stunned to see that she would sign. And one of the members of the 2006 team, former captain Danny Flannery, reached out to this professor last fall. He wrote to her and said how much it had hurt him to see her signature, and that he just wanted to give her this information. And she wrote back. She said that she had been thinking of him a lot as Nightfong's case had collapsed, that she felt terrible, that she recognized that there were elements of the group's statement that were improper, the unwillingness to qualify Mangum as an alleged victim rather than as the victim, the thanking of the protesters who deserved no thanks. They had an email correspondence. She eventually said that yes, she was going to publish an op-ed or an essay in which she would say that she was sorry for signing the ad and recognizing the harm that it had caused to members of the lacrosse team. And then on January 17th, her name was alongside 86 other Duke professors in signing the so-called clarifying faculty statement, which among other provisions said that each and every signatory would not apologize in any way for the Group of 88's ad. And Flannery wrote to her and said, look, you told me that you were going to apologize, and now you publicly sign a document that says you won't apologize. What is going on? And her response to Flannery was that unless she signed the clarifying statement, and I'm quoting directly here, my voice won't count for much in my world. Culture exists in some Duke departments in which a clearly well-meaning professor could conclude that the only way that she could retain a voice with colleagues was by publicly betraying her own students. Thank you.
All the people who've been criticized in this, the one person who ever disciplined a lacrosse player was Coach Mike Pressler. And he seems to be the only person from Duke who suffered any harm for that. And I wondered if you had any comment about the administration's approach to Coach Pressler and throwing him under the bus.
There are 2 points with that. Let me start with what I think is the easiest answer and then move on to the harder one. And the easiest answer is the manner in which Pressler's departure was orchestrated. That on April 5th, as part of this 2,377 word guilt-presuming statement, it was announced that Pressler had resigned. We now know that Pressler was fired. And the fact that it was announced as a resignation allowed people to speculate that maybe Pressler was betraying the team. And if you actually look at the cable news talk commentary from the following night, several commentators made this speculation. So I think the easiest answer to this in terms of the handling is that, quite apart from the merits of whether or not Pressler should have been fired, the manner in which Pressler was dismissed appeared to be designed to make the players look as guilty as possible, and I think that was very troubling. In terms of the departure of Pressler, one purpose, presumably, of the Coleman Committee investigation was to investigate Pressler's behavior and whether or not Pressler had exercised appropriate oversight of the lacrosse team. It is, I think, an unusual procedure, to put it mildly, to make judgments on a person's fate before an investigation has been conducted. Normally you do the investigation and then you make the judgment. In this case it was done in the reverse. President Broadhead has on several occasions been asked about this sort of unusual pattern in a good Q&A session with Rob Copeland from the Chronicle last January in particular, and his argument was, well, we can see that Pressler did nothing wrong, but he had to go to turn a new leaf. That, in fact, I don't have access to all of the information that might be in Pressler's personnel file. I could imagine a scenario where that could be a justified decision by a university. I mean, we have had similar applications, but that was not the portrayal that was made. These were brought to the administration's attention, ironically, one day after Pressler was dismissed, and there's no evidence that these were ever investigated. So there seems to have been a kind of double standard of investigation here, and again, if we're thinking of standard procedures, there should not.